Okay, I think we'll get started here tonight. Thanks everyone for coming. My name is Christine Lowe. I'm with the Howard County Department of Public Works, Bureau of Environmental Services, Stormwater Management Division. And we're here tonight to discuss the results of a drainage study that was completed in the Plum Tree and Little Plum Tree branch watersheds in the Valley, Meade, Chatham, and Nob Hill areas of Ellicott City. So the general study area is bounded by St. John's Lane to the east, I-70 and Maryland 99 to the north, Bethany Lane and Longview Drive to the west, and Miller Branch Library, Frederick Road to the south. And this study is in direct response to concerns from the community asking for some flood mitigation options to be evaluated. And thanks to our friends at the State Highway Administration who funded this study, their consultants with McCormick Taylor are here tonight to present the results. So this study was focused on the effects of flooding related to a rise in the stream levels in response to rainfall. Oh, almost lost our camera there. So that's the main focus of the study, and then looking for mitigation options. The mitigation options that were reviewed consisted primarily of two main types of mitigation, one being stormwater management improvements, such as adding new facilities or improving existing facilities. The study also reviewed capacity and conveyance improvements, things like upgrading culverts, existing culverts to bridges with larger openings, or adding new storm drain systems or diversions to divert stormwater away from the flood-prone areas. Just a basic outline of what's going to be, or the agenda for this evening. We have, the presentation will consist of two parts. The first part being the presentation of the study goals and existing conditions. We'll take a break there for some questions and comments. And then part two of the presentation will be a discussion of these potential mitigation options. And again, there'll be an opportunity for some questions and comments at the end there for that. Just another note, this is a comprehensive study. As some of you are probably aware, there's been previous studies that have been done in the past at more localized areas, at specific culvert crossings. But this study really looks at the watersheds as a whole and attempts to review some mitigation options more holistically, looking at the stream as a system and really trying to identify ways to reduce the effects of flooding. And the study has been ongoing for the past year or so. There's been a couple rounds of topographic surveys. You've probably seen the surveyors out there. We have done some debris removal with a nonprofit called Ready and a private contractor where we've removed woody debris from streams. There was also a survey that was sent out to residents that lived at residents and commercial properties adjacent to the streams. And some of you may have received those surveys and provided feedback. We really thank you for providing that feedback that helped to inform the study that's being presented here tonight. Let's see, just a word about comments. There will be an opportunity after tonight to provide comments. If you don't want to get up and speak, that's fine. You can provide written comments. We provided comment forms as you walked in. You can leave those here with us tonight. Or at the end of the presentation, we'll provide to you an email address where you can send additional comments. The presentation materials and a report will also be available on our county website here soon. So just an introduction to some other folks who are here tonight. The consultants from McCormick Taylor are here, Amy Rebar and Kara Lyons. Also from the county, we have Mark DeLuca, who's the Bureau Chief of Environmental Services. Mark Richmond, who's the Chief of the Stormwater Management Division. And from the county administration, we have Phil Nichols here as well, who would like to say a few words before we begin.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you again for coming out this evening. I just want to say briefly, again, my name is Phil Nichols. I serve as the Assistant Chief Administrative Officer in the county. I work for County Executive Alan Kittleman. The county executive, immediately after the flooding on July 30th, certainly walked the Valley Meade area in addition to Ellicott City and saw the damage that was done. And as a result of that, working with the state, working with the Maryland Department of Transportation and Secretary Ron, which we greatly appreciate their support to this effort, we're able to get this analysis kicked off. And so you know, it's good that we're here tonight to hear the results of that analysis, and without further ado, I'd like Amy to come on up.
All right, thank you, everyone. As Christine described, this will be our agenda for this evening for the presentation. We have a lot to cover. So we'll begin by saying, what does a flood model do? In the most basic terms, it determines the quantity of water that is moving through a reach. For this study, we have outlined that the watershed, which is shown for Plum Tree Branch and Little Plum Tree Branch, shown by the green lines on the screen. The quantity of water is the amount of water, and that will be the hydrology that we'll be describing for this study. And then we'll move on to talk about the hydraulics of this study, which will evaluate the depth and the velocity of water that is coming down the stream channel. Now, the study areas that we looked at are designated by the black boxes on the screen. We looked at 12,000 linear feet on Plum Tree Branch and 4,000 linear feet on Little Plum Tree Branch. We specifically looked at that July 30th storm event, and then we're also looking at the standard storm events, which would be the 100-year event. So what is a 100-year storm? For many, that term might be a little bit confusing. It has a 1% chance of happening at any given year. Similarly, the 10-year storm has a 1 in 10 chance, and a 50-year storm has a 1 in 50 chance. These are all based on probabilities, of course, and this can certainly happen more frequently than what the common name implies. For Ellicott City in Howard County, the 100-year storm is 8.5 inches of rain that is falling within a 24-hour period. For the July 30th storm event, we had 6.6 inches of rain falling in under 3 hours of time. So I'm going to go over a few technical terms. What is a hydrograph? The hydrograph is shown by the graphic here, which is a curve that tells us the peak flow that we're seeing over time moving through that channel. The intensity of the flow is defined by how sharp the curve is. As you can see here, between the period of 8 and 9 o'clock, that curve is very steep, showing that that was a very intense storm. The peak flow is at the top, and that is represented in cubic feet per second. Now, the area under the curve will tell us the volume of water that is running down the stream channel. And then for the July 30th event, that was 20.5 million cubic feet. That's a large number to comprehend, so in our industry we change the units and call it acre feet. So how much is 1 acre foot of water? So it's 1 foot of water in depth over a 1 acre area. And locally, we identified that the Dick's Sporting Goods in the Chatham Station Shopping Center as a 1 acre footprint. So just imagine 1 foot of water over that footprint being 1 acre foot. And then also for the July 30th storm, that was 470 acre feet. So imagine a 47-story building over that footprint would be the amount of water we would need to store to stop that flood flow through there. Okay, when we evaluate hydrology, we look at neighborhood history. As you can see here, we're going to start with 1943. The watershed was mostly all farmland. US 40 was constructed, and then we also have Greenway Drive identified on this picture. That was also a farm road. I put labels up here where I-70 and US 29 are. They'll be developed in the future. 1963, we see more development occurring around US 40 by Longview and Greenway Drive. The homes were constructed a lot closer to the channel due to there was not any floodplain regulations or storm drain regulations at that time. Moving on to 1971, the development is expanding closer to I-70 and over to US 29. You can see Michael's Way on here now identified. And then we're to 1998, where the watershed has mostly developed at this point. The roadways are constructed, and If you look closer up the Plum Tree branch, you can see that there's some open space where the stream has more of a floodplain, and then there's some woody areas along the stream bank. So this is when floodplain regulations were in existence. And then we're at 2016. The photographs between the two are not very, very different. Okay, so looking at watershed hydrology, the entire study area consisted of about a 2 square mile drainage area. The Plum Tree branch section is shown in light green, and that is slightly over 1 square mile. And the Little Plum Tree branch is slightly under 1 square mile and is shown in orange. We further divided this study area into 10 sub-areas, which consisted of locations where we had roadway crossings, where you might have a tributary coming in, or possibly where a storm drain inflow point is along that stream. So by analyzing these 10 sub-drainage areas, we were able to determine the peak flow throughout the stream. So after we determined our peak flow, we wanted to check our numbers. So to check the calibrated numbers, we have an industry standard called the fixed region regression equations. That's a window of values that will validate the values in the hydrology that we determined. We also use the 2016 hydrology panel report, which is also an industry standard. The land use that we used for our watershed hydrology was the ultimate land use condition. Since this watershed is mostly built out, we felt that that would provide us with a conservative answer for our modeling results. Okay, I also wanted to point out that there are 16 existing ponds within the watershed, 8 on Plum Tree and 8 on Little Plum Tree. So the area that is draining to those 16 ponds is 0.3 square miles, which is only 15% of the land cover is actually reaching one of those existing ponds. And looking at the amount of storage that does provide, it's 10 acre-feet of storage. Now remember, the amount that was under that curve that we previously saw was 470 acre-feet. We also looked at multiple scenarios for our hydrologic analysis. We're looking at the 100-year storm, which is the industry standard benchmark. We also looked at the 10-year storm, which I'll describe later in the presentation. And then we also recreated that July 30th event. So in order to receive the best data that we had available, we often refer to gauge data within a watershed. Plum Tree Branch did not have any existing gauges within the watershed. So we referred to the Ellicott City watershed to determine the amount of rainfall and the distribution to use for this study. And that was also provided by the National Weather Service Center. They gave us the July 30th storm event information. We recognize that Plum Tree Branch could have received more or less rainfall during that event, but that was the best information that we had to use. So moving on to the hydraulic analysis, we used a one-dimensional hydraulic analysis for this study, which is called HECRAS. The FEMA floodplains are mapped using this technology. For Little Plum Tree and Plum Tree Branch, we independently modeled both of those, and we chose flow change locations along each of the reaches, again, where we had tributaries coming in or where we had inflow points from storm drains. We chose to use a 1D model for this study because, in the most general terms, this is a fairly straightforward channel. The stream is fairly straight. We have a defined channel and a floodplain bank. We have general crossings and also some homes and obstructions within the channel, which is a standard use for a one-dimensional model. We didn't have any kind of intricate flow patterns that would warrant a more complex model. Okay, so looking at the details of all of the storm events, we're looking at the hydrograph here. And the red line shows the July 30th event, the green line shows the 100-year event, and the blue line demonstrates the 10-year hydrograph. As you can see here, the peak discharge during the July 30th event exceeded a 100-year storm. But the area under the curve, which determines the volume of water that was running through the stream system, is less than the 100-year storm. And that's because the July 30th storm was more intense. It had a more intense storm over a shorter period of time, whereas a 100-year storm draws out over that 24-hour period. Okay, and then this is a graphic of the flood extents of the 100-year storm and the July 30th storm. You might not be able to see very much difference here. Where the 100-year exceeds the overlap, you'll see that designated in red. And then when the July 30th storm exceeded, it's in darker blue. You can most likely see that at the locations of the roadway crossings at Michael's Way, slightly at US 40, and then also at Frederick Road. I also want to point out that the green cross sections through here are going to be study points that we evaluated, and we'll be talking about that more throughout the study. So we divided Plum Tree Branch into 3 zones. Zone 1 is located from the top of the study above Michael's Way and extends down to Hearthstone Road. In this area, the homes are set back a little bit further. We have a defined channel, and then we have that floodplain area. Zone 2, it goes from Hearthstone Road to US 40. That was where most of the homes are built closer to the channel that was built earlier in the development of the neighborhood. And then Zone 3 is from US 40 down to south of Frederick Road. Okay, and looking at a cross-section through each of those zones, I'll describe what you see here. The black line is the existing ground line. And the red points designate where the channel banks are. The blue line at the top is the 100-year water surface elevation. The shaded area in between those zones is the velocity distribution of that water. As you can see, the darker blue areas within the channel are deeper and the water is moving a lot faster. And then when you get into the floodplain, you're seeing the areas are more shaded in yellows and greens, which show shallower depth and also a slower velocity. The gray hatched boxes that you see here are the actual structures, which may be a home or possibly a shed within that cross-section. This is an example of what kind of hydraulic variables and information that we can get with our hydraulic analysis.
So switching over to the Little Plum Tree Branch, we're going to start here again with our hydrograph. So we have the July 30th storm shown in red, the 100-year storm shown in green, and the 10-year storm shown in blue. The peak of the July 30th storm isn't quite as smooth for Little Plum Tree, but that's just due to some of the timing of the subwatersheds that we looked at, because there's some very highly impervious areas with the commercialized space along US 40, so that water gets there very quick. So we almost see a double peak there. But again, we can see a clear peak discharge for each of these storms. So the July 30th was again higher than the standard 100-year event on Little Plum Tree. But when we start looking at the volume, that area underneath of the curve, the 100-year has a larger runoff volume when compared to the July 30th. And as Amy mentioned, that's due to the fact that the 100-year is a standard storm. It's over a 24-hour period, so the area under that curve can extend much larger than that short, intense July 30th storm. When we take out those peak discharges and we put them into our hydraulic model, the result we can get is a floodplain map. So on this floodplain, you can see the light blue is the existing 100-year extents, and where the July 30th storm went further than that 100-year is noted in dark blue. We can see we have some roadway overtopping along North Chatham in a few areas. And there's also 2 cross-sections on Little Plum Tree as we evaluated 2 zones along this reach for further detailed analysis. So moving on to our zones in Little Plum Tree, the first zone is from the upstream study limit, which is around the intersection of Ramblewood Road and North Chatham, and it extends down through the North Chatham Road culvert, so that includes that concrete channel along North Chatham. Zone 2 is the downstream study, portion of the study, starting at that North Chatham Road culvert and extending to our downstream limit, which is the culvert that runs under US 40, and it starts behind the Home Depot in that commercial area at 40. So delving into those cross sections, this gives you a view from our HECRAS cross section. And the ground line is again represented by the black line. The existing 100-year water surface is shown by the blue line. The bank points are in red, and then we have the velocity distribution in between. So again, we see deeper flows and faster moving flows within that channel portion. But as we start to extend into the floodplain areas, the flow gets a little bit more shallow and it moves a little bit slower, shown by those yellows and greens in the cross section. But another one thing I want to point out here, some of the tools we have available in HECRAS, these cross sections were surveyed. So we can see some things such as the roadways. But I'd like to highlight here on both of these cross sections, we can identify North Chatham Road. So we can see at what point that the roadway is overtopping and at how much depth, and also then looking at the velocity or the speed of that water at these locations. So at this time, that wraps up part one of our presentation on the existing conditions. So we'd like to welcome any questions for about 10 minutes before we jump into the second half. I'm going to pass you the microphone.
Okay.
Or if you want to ask your question, I can repeat it either way.
It doesn't matter. So, okay, so I have two questions. The first is will you please define what ultimate land use is? And the other question was, when you talked about the ponds, are you talking about stormwater management ponds that were established, and how many of those are in the Little Plum Tree and how many of those are on the Plum Tree branch?
Okay, so the first question was related to the ultimate land use. What was used for ultimate land use?
Ultimate land use is actually developed by the Department of Planning, I believe, and that is actually you consider zoning. So your land use, you may not have the development established to what the zoning is at the time, but we considered it built out. So if it was an unbuilt parcel that is zoned residential, then we would have considered that within the study as developed to residential. So that would be ultimate zoning.
Okay.
And then also the question about the amount of ponds. There were 16 total. There are 8 on Plum Tree and then 8 ponds on Little Plum Tree.
And were those stormwater management ponds that were already built, or are they natural?
Yeah, there are existing stormwater facilities. Currently, I believe all those were designed for the 2- and the 10-year events.
So on your models, you have the total volume, you also have the rate. I think what most of us care about is how high the water gets at max. So, you know, the 100-year storm has more volume, but has more time to get that volume downstream. So when we're looking at this and we look at the seriousness of it, which again, for me, and I think most, seriousness is how hard the water gets. Does it get up to houses and stuff like that? So it seems like that rate's a little bit better measure of that.
Yes, actually, the second part of our presentation will actually show the water surface reductions that we're seeing with different options. So we'll be able to present what that water surface is in relation to our improvement options.
Right. And, okay, thanks. And the second thing is, which I didn't see there, is you're talking about volume, but obstructions change again, I guess maybe I'll get to it later, but you know, some of the issues with how high the water gets has to do with obstructions in the stream bed. So,
yes, the cross sections that we did show, the example cross sections in those different zones, those hatched areas were buildings and sheds and obstructions.
Okay, well, I'm thinking about like obstructions that go. I mean, the one I'm concerned most is where the road that crosses over with that can't absorb very much water going through. So on the high side, on the upstream side, the water is probably 15 feet higher than on the downstream side.
Sure.
So, okay.
Yeah, our hydraulic model does show that. Okay. We include all of the roadway crossings along with the openings. So those are comprehensively included in the model.
Okay.
more specific about the ultimate build-out? Can you tell us specifically how many homes you're talking about and the spacing of those homes?
Not offhand. Anything that is the current zoning in that ultimate condition is what we applied. So I think if you would request something in specifically, we could look into that and provide that as a comment.
Maybe I missed it, but you say this is a 10-year event that we had in July 30th?
No. The discharge exceeded the 100-year, but the volume was less than 100-year.
These are all the wetlands we're talking about where the stream flows through. Are some spots more susceptible to flooding than others? Maybe would you identify it that way?
Within the stream valley, there are areas that are more susceptible. They have broader floodplains. They'll receive more water. The floodplain footprint that we showed on the mapping can demonstrate that, the extent of the flooding, and then we can also look at how deep they are across the cross sections as well.
You can't do anything about that, is that what you're saying?
I guess that will probably be more discussed in the second phase when we're looking at the mitigation, and we can show you what we're proposing to help reduce the water surface.
For the model, is there any difference between, say, if you had a storm that came through a week before that had saturated the ground versus you being in a drought for a month as far as runoff, that you would anticipate it being different, or does it really matter?
We don't look into the saturation details. Our time of concentration will look into what the infiltration rate of the soil type is, but it doesn't account for the frequency of when it would rain.
I'm loud enough, I don't need it. It's okay. I want to follow up on Sue's question about the ultimate land use condition. Because currently there is an undeveloped parcel at the upper end of Plum Tree that when you would have modeled it, you would have modeled it as R20. Yet the proposed development is going through the conditional use process and they want to put 5 units per acre, not 2 units per acre.
I believe we modeled that as 1/8 of an acre in our ultimate condition.
Okay. Can you say that again?
I believe we modeled that as a 1/8 acre density for that parcel for ultimate land use. Other questions? So now we're going to start talking about our mitigation options and our modeling results on both of these streams. As you can see here, the green area designates the undeveloped open space within the watershed, and the red shows the developed areas. If you look closely, the open space areas are often along the stream banks where we have some of that floodplain area, with the exception of that large parcel up by I-70. So as we look at the mitigation options, we are dividing them into 2 categories. The first would be the stormwater management improvements. This would include providing storage within that watershed. So we're looking at that open space and proposing large online storage facilities within that open space, as well as the opportunity to expand existing ponds if there is also additional open space adjacent to those as well. The second category would be conveyance or capacity improvements. This would include upsizing the existing roadway structures, such as converting culverts to bridges, and also to provide a bypass pipe or a storm drain extension to divert flow from a frequently flooded area to an area further downstream. We looked at 15 hydraulic models for this study. 2 of them were existing conditions, 1 on each stream. And then we also looked at 9 options on Plum Tree Branch and 4 options on Little Plum Tree Branch. So looking at the goals of our study, that was to try to bring the 100-year water surface level down to a 10-year water surface level. And as you look here, the hydrographs are the same as we showed before, with the 100-year represented in green and the 10-year represented in blue. The area between those hydrographs would be the amount that we would need to store within the watershed on Plum Tree Branch to bring that level down. So looking at the modeling results from HECRES, this is the existing 100-year overlaid with the 10-year existing as well. The 10-year is the light blue and the 100 is the darker blue. The extents of the 10-year are certainly reduced from the 100-year in this location. So we looked at all the mitigation options that I spoke of before. We're particularly looking at 5 new facilities to retain water within Plum Tree Branch, shown in blue. There are 5 structures that we would modify, shown as the red dots, and then also some conveyance improvements, which would be a diversion pipe and a storm drain extension shown in the purple. Okay, so looking at each of these individually, pond number 1 is located upstream of Michael's Way, and this would consist of grading out the facility nearly 8 feet deeper than what the stream channel is currently, and this would provide 23 acre-feet of storage. Also, to accommodate this, we would have to install some sort of retaining structure, which would be a weir or a riser structure to prevent that flow from moving downstream. The second set of ponds would be what you see here in between Michael's Way and upstream of Hearthstone. These are 3 ponds that are in series, and they produce 132 acre-feet of storage. Along with the grading, which would probably produce embankments of about 17 feet, we recognize that this is a nicely forested area. So to accommodate the pond, we would be removing those trees within that area. And then lastly was an offline facility. There are 2 existing small facilities right off of Country Lane. They currently provide a little over 2 acre-feet of storage in its current condition. There is some additional open space within that parcel. If that facility was expanded to maximize storage, we could provide 23 acre-feet of storage at this location. That would also provide storage for the 100-year event at this location, and it may reduce localized flooding downstream of this pond.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you tell us the difference between offline and online?
Sure. Online ponds are within an existing stream channel where we would just be widening that stream to provide temporary storage for those events, where offline ponds are usually fed by a storm drain pipe, and there's not a constant base flow. So looking at the hydrograph again with the 100-year storm and all of those storage improvements, you can see by the red line that we're greatly reducing that peak flow from before it was above the green 100-year event to now we're approximately at the 10-year event, which is shown in blue. We've reduced our peak flow by 800 CFS, and we're now storing a total of 178 acre-feet within that watershed. Okay, moving on to the second category, which is the conveyance and the conveyance improvements. We're looking at the structural upgrades at Hearthstone, Brookmead, Longview, US 40, and Frederick Road. We chose to approximate the width of the channel as the opening size for the structures for this study, since that would be the least impactive option. We also looked at a 5-foot diversion pipe from Hearthstone to US 40. We noticed that the most frequent flooding is occurring in that zone 2. So a 5-foot diversion pipe would intercept about 200 CFS of flow and then reintroduce that further downstream of US 40.
Where would that start? Where's
Upstream of Hearthstone.
upstream? Okay. Right, that's what I was saying. Okay, upstream of Hearthstone.
The second conveyance improvement we would consider a 5-foot culvert extension off of Greenway, and that would continue the storm drain system further down and be reintroduced downstream of Frederick Road. This would also convey about 200 CFS of flow as well. Okay, so this is an image of the modeling results with the 100-year existing, and then the scenario where we have the 100-year with all of those storage and conveyance improvements. As you can see, there is a significant amount of reduction in the floodplain, especially within zone 2. There are small pieces that you see in red up by Michael's Way where we're not increasing the actual depth of flow, we're just expanding the width a little bit because we're grading out those ponds, so that's just demonstrated in red. Okay, and now we're actually zooming into those model results. This is zone 1. We currently have 6 homes that are within our existing 100-year floodplain. With all of our options with the storage and the conveyance, we've removed all of those homes in that scenario. Looking at zone 2, there are 12 existing homes that are located within the existing floodplain, and with the options of the ponds and the conveyance options, we reduced that to 1 house that would remain in the floodplain, and I believe that is the home that is getting currently raised.
Yeah.
Raised as
The house on stilts.
with a Z or without a Z?
No,
Raised being torn
the house.
down or raised
Oh.
being lifted up?
It's the house
Lifted.
on stilts.
Yes.
Yeah, the one that
Right,
they're
the one
adding
on
the
stilts, right.
stilts, yes, raised and then raised.
And they're selling it.
And then the modeling results of zone 3, there are 11 existing homes that are in the floodplain, and we would be removing 8 of those houses. There would only be 3 remaining within the floodplain.
Hold on. I want to get a picture of this.
These will also be online as well.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, so looking at the cross sections again in each of those zones, they're very similar to before, but now we've superimposed that proposed condition over each zone as well. The zone 1 is where we have those ponds graded out, so you can see the pink line on the bottom is that proposed grading. That would be that ground line. The blue line represents the existing 100-year, and the green is the proposed 100-year water surface elevation. So within zone 1, we're experiencing 6.3 feet of water surface reduction within zone 1, within this cross-section of zone 1. And then we're also reducing the width of the floodplain as well. It's reducing over 91 feet. Within zone 2, we're not doing any grading within zone 2, so the actual existing and proposed ground lines are the same, but we're seeing a 3.5-foot reduction. The house just upstream of Brookmead is no longer within the 100-year floodplain in this scenario, and we're reducing the floodplain width as well. Zone 3, we're seeing a 2-foot reduction in the water surface. Again, there is no grading in this zone, so the existing and proposed ground lines are the same. So far we've looked at improvements on a holistic approach with the whole watershed, but we recognize that there are localized improvements that we could make within the watershed that could provide some improvements to homeowners. We looked at Howard County completed a case study for the 2016 Valley Mede flood event. Many of you received flyers, and we received feedback on the impacts to your homes and your property. We looked at the options of modifying existing storm drain systems, changing outfall locations, extending those, or possibly including new locations for inlets and new storm drains. The examples that we are showing here are along the 3000 block of Brookmead. These two outfalls are actually on private property. One of the opportunities may be to extend that storm drain system so the network actually reaches closer to the stream. Once again, we do have limited storm drain easements within the Valley Mead community. Most of this is on private property. So if these options would be pursued, we would have to coordinate with right-of-way to work with the homeowners as well.
So moving on to Little Plum Tree Branch and the mitigation options that we evaluated. You can see here on the screen. I'd like to first touch back to something that Amy talked about, and that is the fact that we have very little open space to look for storage opportunities, in particular on Little Plum Tree Branch, even along the channel and its floodplain. There is one relatively large parcel that is county owned, and that is highlighted in blue up on the screen. And we did look at that area for potential storage, but unfortunately, due to the property limit restraints, along with the existing elevation, we were only able to grade a few feet in there and provide just under 8 acre-feet of storage. So looking at Little Plum Tree Branch as a whole, that number would hardly move the needle, especially in terms of large storm events like the 100-year. So we moved forward with pursuing, looking into conveyance options on Little Plum Tree. Shown in the green is a parkway conversion of the concrete channel. The 2 red dots represent structure replacements, and the purple line is a diversion pipe. So looking in a little more detail, the 2 structure replacements that we evaluated were the culvert at North Chatham Road, which is that large double metal elliptical cell culvert, and the other one just downstream of that, which is the concrete culvert that provides the driveway access into the St. Paul School and Church. So in both of these options, we removed the culverts and we modeled bridges at those crossings, maintaining the existing stream channel at those locations. So again, like Amy touched on with Plum Tree, limiting the impacts other than just changing the structure. Second, we evaluated a diversion pipe, and this diversion pipe was modeled as a 5-foot concrete culvert, and that was chosen because of cover limitations along this roadway and the feasibility of installing a culvert while maintaining traffic at that location. So we looked at that pipe. It removes about 200 CFS from Little Plum Tree, and ideally then we would want to outfall that back downstream of US 40 to get it out of where it's causing these problems. Excuse me. And so we would tie that pipe either into the existing storm drain network on North Chatham and potentially upgrade some other storm drain along the way, or we would have to provide an entirely new storm drain network, which would obviously be pretty invasive. And last, we looked at a parkway, which involved the conversion of the existing concrete channel along North Chatham into basically a covered box culvert. So we modeled it as 3 large box culverts in the same location as the current channel, and that would provide conveyance for the stream underneath the roadway. And then at the surface, we would envision some sort of almost like a mini parkway. We could create some green space with some sidewalks through there as well. And I forgot to mention, along with that option, we would be replacing the Ramblewood Road and the North Chatham. So those would both go and be replaced with those triple box cell culverts. So when we look at the model, the results of those options, unfortunately without storage, we're running the same discharges as the existing conditions. And since we're still limited with the channel and the slope of the channel, we're not allowing that flow to go anywhere. So the floodplain extents are very similar. We have the existing condition shown with the dark blue, and then the conveyance option water surface reductions are shown with the light blue. So not a whole lot of change. We do have a slight improvement around North Chatham and around that private driveway. This is primarily a result of having that diversion help with removing some of the flow from that area. So Again, this is with the 2 structure replacements and the diversion pipe. So looking a little closer, at the top of our reach with some of that backwater from the culvert, we do see 1 home in the floodplain, but our improvements do not affect the water surface at that location since our improvements are downstream. So that home remains in the 100-year floodplain in the proposed condition as well. Looking at zone 2, again, very little change in the water surface. We're still seeing roadway overtopping at this location as well. When we look in detail at our HECRAS cross-sections, again, the black line represents the ground, and that is the same in existing and proposed conditions since we are not proposing any channel changes at these locations. The 100-year existing water surface is recognized by the blue line, and the proposed 100-year water surface is noted by that green line. We can see in zone 1, we don't have any change. Even with the structure change, we still have the same amount of flow trying to get through that channel. So even with a new structure, it's not getting through any faster. In zone 2, we see a slight reduction of about 0.6 feet at that cross section, which results in a width reduction of 6 feet. But we still, in both locations, are seeing the roadway overtopping at North Chatham. So as Amy mentioned, on Plum Tree Branch, we also utilized that case study that you all provided us with some information, and we looked at some localized storm drain potential improvements on Little Plum Tree Branch. The one area that we focused on to present to you tonight is at the corner of the North Chatham Road and Paulskirk Drive intersection. And this, we know, is an inflow into Little Plum Tree Branch. It's an area where there's some open channel flow, and then it's again restricted back into a culvert, and then open channel again on private property. So this was an area we took a closer look at. In an aerial view, you can see here on North Chatham is on the bottom left of the screen with Paulskirk Drive above it, and that area in between is where we know there's a flooding concern. So that's why we're taking a look here. But if you also note, St. John's Lane is in the upper right corner, and we are aware that there is an existing stormwater management facility at that location. We looked into that pond, and it is designed for the 2-year and the 10-year event. So any larger storms, such as the 100, is not being attenuated at that facility. So that water is just being diverted straight through downstream. However, that land is county-owned, so there is a potential here that that pond could be expanded to help mitigate some of the issues downstream. But it is important to note that while we could extend this pond for a localized improvement, looking at Little Plum Tree as a whole, it won't move the needle. It's not a big enough drainage area to provide enough storage to help downstream significantly. The second option at this location was to implement some new storm drains. So we looked at putting storm drain along Paulskirk Drive, and that would divert a significant amount of flow from that drainage area to that Paulskirk cross culvert, and we would tie it back into some of the existing storm drain along North Chatham Road and outfall it back into North Chatham, the concrete culvert in North Chatham. So just to give you an overview once again, as we sum up tonight, we ran 15 hydraulic models, so 2 existing and 9 on Plum Tree and 4 on Little Plum Tree. And I'm sure you're wondering, those are giant facilities, how much do they cost? So on Plum Tree, again, we looked at 5 different structures. We looked at 5 different storage facilities, and then we had some diversions and storm drain extensions. On Little Plum Tree, we had 2 structure conversions, a diversion pipe, and that large parkway. So a large range of costs here. These are ballpark estimates based on our initial analysis. We also looked at those localized storm drains. So we gave you 2 examples of localized storm drain improvements, 1 on each branch. But note that we're aware there are plenty more of them we looked at from the case study. So we have 6 on Little Plum Tree and 12 on Plum Tree in this estimate. So in conclusion, as Amy discussed about Plum Tree Branch, we had some significant reductions in water surface with our combined mitigation options. We eliminated roadway overtopping at all of the structures except for the 100-year event at Brook Mede. We removed the existing 100-year floodplain in existing conditions, hits 31 homes along Plum Tree branch, and our mitigation options takes 27 of those out of that 100-year floodplain. On Little Plum Tree, unfortunately, we weren't able to provide significant storage for larger events for that watershed, so we evaluated just the conveyance, and those provided negligible water surface reductions, and the roadway at North Chatham still overtops in those conditions. We looked at some localized storm drain improvements, and those would just be, as Amy and I both discussed, looking at areas where we would potentially provide some improvement that would help with lower frequency storms that cause more common events. So again, these options are very conceptual at this point, and we're very aware that they would have a large impact on the community. A great thing to reduce the water surface, but will definitely have some negative impacts with putting in such large ponds and all the disturbance. So the county and state highway are both going to evaluate the results and communicate with you guys and figure out the best way moving forward. So with that, as Christine mentioned, there is an email up here that you're welcome to email any comments or questions. There's also the website where everything will be posted. And at this time, if there's more questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
I don't need the mic, I don't
Okay.
think. Is it possible to get a copy of this, in terms of particularly the maps that you're showing?
Yeah, the question was, will copies of the presentation be provided? Yes, we'll make them available to download from our website there. Probably the presentation later this week, or the presentation later this week. There's a hydraulic report that goes along with the study that won't be available probably till early December. But I can certainly, I'm not sure if it's emailable because it's a large presentation, but it will be posted on the website where you can just click on a link and download. I can work with you on making sure you get what you need there. So.
I was wondering if the evaluations that you did would help you figure out if any of those individual things would be better than others, like do the ponds help more than the bridges? And when somebody says we only have $20 million instead of $37 million, and they want to pick a few of these, how do you pick which ones are better?
We analyzed, yes. We actually analyzed each of the options individually, and then we did the combined options as well. There are opportunities to look at, combinations of one here, one pond and one conveyance, if that would be warranted, if that's the way, we would like to proceed. But at this time, we had individual results of each of those options and then the combined option.
And what we saw was combined?
Correct.
Okay. And if we request through that email address, maybe we can get some of the individual ones too?
Yes, yeah, and that will all be in the report. That will all be described in the report when that's posted as well.
Okay.
Do the cost estimates include purchasing any of those homes that now become part of the 100-year floodplain? Or is the intent of the county to leave those houses there and then the homeowners are now in the 100-year floodplain and have to purchase appropriate insurance and take appropriate steps?
Yeah, there was no consideration of anything, doing anything with the homes in this study. It was all just the improvements for the ponds and the conveyance, so the estimate included just those facilities.
There was a request to speak up. What Amy was saying was that the homes that were shown in the floodplain are existing now in the floodplain. There's no new homes that will be put in the floodplain based on these proposal.
Mine is not in the 100-year floodplain, and it would be.
We can talk about that. I mean, maybe they used it based on mapping, not based on an elevation certificate or any actual ground topography. This study is not suggesting putting new homes in the floodplain, so we can clarify that with you directly.
From what you presented, Plum Tree looks like it's going to get some major relief, but Little Plum Tree is not going to get any relief from the flooding. The covering over of the culvert for $26 million would be a total waste of money. Right now the issue is, if you look at the pipes that drain, we have the open culvert, which goes to two 8-foot corrugated steel pipes that go underneath Chatham over to Resurrection. At that point, the Resurrection driveway, it hits a 5-foot concrete culvert going underneath their driveway. You go downstream further than that, behind Bare Bones, and it goes into a 4-foot pipe to go underneath 40. So it's you know, original engineering was totally reversed from what it should have been. You know, the pipes keep getting smaller as you go downstream. The place that is the big choke point right now is at Resurrection. If that was the driveway turned into a bridge, that would, you know, pull the cork out of the bottom and allow that water to get away. Right now, that water backs up and just floods, you know, overtops the street. If you look at it behind Bare Bones, which is the south side of the church, there's, I don't know, a 9 or 10 acre parcel there that's wetlands that's owned by the church that obviously can never be built on, which a 9 acre stormwater management pond, and utilize that 4-foot pipe that's currently being used for all this water to get to the other side of 40. And that was another question I had. That 4-foot pipe has probably been in there for, well, it's been in there since the shopping center was built, you know, 40 years ago. I'm sure that that has never been assessed to see what blockages are inside of it, because it's an open pipe that branches, everything goes into. So someone needs to physically check that pipe out and see what blockages are in it. When we had this storm, the pipe actually exploded in several places on the south side of 40 due to, I'm assuming, blockages inside that pipe. The water pressure just forced it up out of the ground, blew it open. So, you know, those are the issues on the Little Plum Tree side. Is just it's not creating the parkway over closing the culvert. It's opening up the pathways from the church down, and that would solve 90% of the problems there. There's just nowhere for it to go. It all backs up into everyone's yard. The drain pipe on Paul's Kirk, I mean, that's a great idea. That'll help a lot. You know, for multiple houses that are flooded, that we definitely would like to see done. But again, $26 million to cover the culvert is a total waste of money because we still have the same amount of water.
Yeah, we did look at upsizing the crossing at the church property, as well as the other one with the double culvert.
Well,
so
the double culvert really doesn't need to be upsized. It's
just needs to be cleaned out.
It's 16-foot diameter of pipe going into a 5-foot diameter pipe. So
Right,
the 5-foot diameter pipe is the problem, not the 16-foot diameter.
Right, and that is located on private property, and it's in a fairly extensive storm drain system that goes under the Home Depot and then changes
size. Well, it doesn't
size.
go under, it goes around it and then goes under the shopping center behind Bare Bones is where that pipe disappears. Where
Correct.
it goes from there, who knows?
Yeah, and it does change size within the underground system. So we did actually look at extending the model further downstream, but without altering that section of it, it didn't change the model at all. So the extents upstream do not change if we would extend the model further downstream without any improvements at that location.
Well, creating that water storage on the south side of the church would be optimal. Because right now it's wetlands, it can't be built on anyway. I'm sure for a meager sum, the church would love to get rid of it.
We could look at that as a localized, if we pursue localized storm drain improvements, that's something that we could consider, within the comments if that's something we would move forward with.
I'm sorry, but I'm not sure I understood all of the different models that you ran. So I'm wondering, what would happen if you didn't have ultimate build out? How does that impact the models and your mitigations?
Can you hear me? So we started with existing conditions, and then we wanted to move to ultimate to provide a conservative analysis. But it's important, the difference in the discharge, because it's a very small portion of the watershed, was about 5%. So when you look at existing versus the ultimate, the discharges were not terribly different.
You're saying the difference is 5%, is that after the mitigation or now?
No, and comparing if we ran the current land use compared to the ultimate land use. So those discharges are about 5% different.
The ultimate produces more discharge.
Correct.
Hi, my name is Melissa and I live on North Chatham Road. I just want to echo everything that Jack, the gentleman over here, said. I'm not quite sure I fully understood the answer to his questions about, I don't understand how it wouldn't help to reverse that funnel. I mean, right now the water is going into a funnel at Resurrection, and then that funnel continues, around behind Bare Bones and under 40. So I don't quite understand how widening those pipes would not prevent flooding on our street. So if you could just describe again why, if you widen those 4 or 5 foot pipes, that wouldn't reduce the flooding on our street, and why those are not being looked at as options, and also why this area of using the existing wetlands for more stormwater management would also not reduce the flooding on our street.
So the culvert replacement to the bridge is limited by the channel, basically. So
it's not about the culvert replacement, it's about the 4 feet pipes at Resurrection and the smaller pipes.
yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So we replaced that culvert with a bridge. So we basically left the entire channel open in its current condition to continue with just a slab over top of it.
At Resurrection Drive?
Correct.
Okay, okay.
And that's where it doesn't change because it's still restricted by the actual channel. So it's the actual capacity of the channel itself in that area.
Well, the channel is woods in that area.
Okay.
There is
the
no
channel
structure.
deeper? Wider?
We could look into that, yeah. It runs along the property, so then we become a right-of-way issue, but we can certainly look into
I
it.
mean, that certainly the county has ways of working with private property owners.
And there is a sewer line that runs through there, so they already have an easement.
Yeah, we can discuss that and look into it.
And then regarding the parcel downstream, putting the pond in the open parcel downstream, that would just provide storage that would benefit the area downstream. So
Right.
that wouldn't really provide any improvement to the condition upstream. The water would have to all flow through the area first to get to that point.
At this point on North Chatham, the water can't even get through because it is so clogged up with debris that the county hasn't cleaned that in probably 6 or 7 years. And the water just, it stops.
At the end of Chatham Road, I think, we've lived there for 30 years, you could walk across that culvert. Now the water is this deep with trees and everything. It's already a foot deep in there, and they won't clean it. It's just, everything just piles up at the end now. So we've lived there in the past 5 years. It doesn't matter a 100-year storm or the storm of last July. The road is overflowing consistently now, which it never had in the past 25 years. In the past 5 years, it's a normal event for it to come up on the roadway and get out into the road, which it never had. We were excited when it touched the grass. That was a big neighborhood event. Now it's a normal event when it's over the road. It's a choke point, as Jack said. You can make everything as wide as you want above or upstream. If it still has to go through a garden hose, it's coming to an end. It's 16-foot, 12-foot, 20-foot culverts. It's all going to still go in, and it's got to feed through the same size pipe. And so if it's a 4-foot pipe, it's a 4-foot pipe, no matter how big they are upstream.
Yeah, so let the 4-foot pipe be down at the end of it where it can back up on the 20 acres of wetland.
I've never seen cars float down my front street, and it's an everyday event now.
Yeah, but it's disgraceful to look at, number one. It smells, and the backup of all that water. I mean, there have been times when I'm waiting for a house to float down, to be honest. I get logs, you know, God only knows where all this stuff comes from. Yeah, upstream. But the county has got to be responsible to make sure that is cleaned out, and not every 5-7 years.
Do your models include maintenance of those channels? So you could put in all the improvements you want, but if they're not maintained, we don't know what difference it makes.
If they can't be maintained, why do it?
So I've lived in Valley Mead for 8 years, 8.5 years, and when I moved in, just for Amy and Carrie, your sakes, it was gabion baskets right there between the concrete trapezoidal channel and the culvert under Chatham. And those got ripped out about 5 years ago and replaced with riprap. But the riprap was placed in a smaller cross section. So what they're saying now about there's a foot of water in there all the time now, that's true because when the gabions were taken out and the riprap placed, it narrowed the cross section up. So it is backing water up now on a very regular basis. And it was overgrown before. There were willows growing out. There were a lot of trees growing out of the gabion baskets, but they still didn't provide. They provided less roughness than the riprap does now on the smaller cross section. So it has backed up. It does convey less flow now than it did before, just in normal condition.
So there was, I don't know, like a year or two ago, there beyond where your zone is, towards Ramblewood and Michael's Way, some work done along that little part of the stream. Was that not considered an option, or was that an improvement that helped? Or, I mean, you know, because I think it goes back up to where you would put that other pond up there. But I guess that was, you know, maybe another option for working with private property to, you know, pond some of that area too, since you don't have many options through here.
That project was a stream bank stabilization project, so not a flood mitigation option. It wasn't for flood storage. It was just meant to eliminate erosion in that open stream channel.
But could it be used for storage? Is there enough space in?
We didn't look at that specific area that you're showing right there. We looked at the other open parcel. I suppose we could look at that. There's even less space there. That smaller parcel. I can use a pointer. That parcel there is county owned, but that's even smaller than the blue. So doesn't provide a large opportunity for storing floodwaters.
Yeah, and the blue parcel was storing 8 acre feet was what we could maximize on that space. So if that's even a smaller parcel, it would just be a very small quantity.
Just this.
Okay,
Go ahead.
a question about the same mitigating on the Plum Tree branch. Can you go back slides to that? Okay, try to finish. Okay. think it was back a little bit more where you were showing like the houses, the specific houses that it would change
Oh, it zoomed
for.
in?
Yeah.
This one? Keep going.
Yeah, keep going.
So that's between.
Yeah. What, my question was, I live at the 3225 Hearthstone, and my question is, like the water's wide and then it comes in skinny and gets wide again, and I'm wondering why that is, because I've been there with this past storm and the one we had 5 years before that, my entire property was flooded. So that's why I was just questioning that little skinny area. What does that mean? Yeah, right there.
That's an improvement, that's the improvement, that's after the fact.
Well, I think she's saying even the dark blue, at the existing condition, it's just a
Yeah.
little, our model is a little
Like
off there.
the whole road and all my whole property was flooded. That's what I'm trying to understand, why it's not showing that. Anyway, I don't know if you know that answer, but I thought I'd ask.
Yeah, so specifically, a one-dimensional model is approximating that water surface across the entire cross-section. So that is an average. So if you're looking at the entire cross-section, one side might be slightly higher than the other. So it's pretty much an average across that. So you might have received a little bit more or less across that section, but the modeling results wouldn't demonstrate those specifics on your property alone.
Okay.
This thing is back here, right?
Yeah, it does, but
It's putting our system.
this last storm, we were not home when it happened. My husband came home when neighbors called. But the one before, I was in the house, and it was all the way up into their yard from our house. Like, I couldn't even take my dog out to pee. It was everywhere. So that's why I was just curious why it dipped in there, that's all. But that's it.
Yeah, I had a question going further back up the stream on the proposed ponds. So you said something about a 17-foot embankments. Is that 17 feet lower than where they are, or depth-wise, or is that? I just wanted to clarify what you meant there, and how deep those ponds would actually wind up.
I think the best representation would be the cross-section here in Zone 1. You can see that there's quite a grade difference between the existing, so we would actually be grading downward.
Going straight down.
And then to contain the water at the downstream end of each of those weirs, you have to build some sort of retention. So it would be a berm or a weir structure that would hold that back temporarily. The intention is to not hold water in these constantly. It would just be during that storm event, and then it would reestablish the base flow. So this one would actually be carving down into the ground.
Okay.
Further investigation would be needed. You might have bedrock there, so it's, we're just this is very conceptual at this point.
Okay, and that would basically take out all the trees in that whole parcel that's going up there?
Yes.
Would they be replaced in, would there be other trees put in after the ponds are in, or do you have to keep the ponds clear of trees?
Well, the options that we were looking at maximized grading on that parcel. So there are, if something would be pursued further, there are less grading options. You would have less storage. You could preserve some spaces. So there are different iterations as you move forward with furthering the design. So this is just everything we looked at maximized everything to the greatest extent.
Okay.
So I have a question. Have you considered the economic impact if the county were to purchase homes that are built along the stream in current zoning, and then using that private property, which is purchased by the county, to then improve the stream flow, making ponds, creating channels, that sort of thing? Is there any cost? Have you evaluated that? Is there any cost savings?
We didn't look at the economic analysis of the study. Our presentation was more on the hydraulics and the hydrology, not the cost side of it. So that would be something that you know, the county can pursue or evaluate in the future.
Hi, Lisa Soto. I grew up on Ramsey Drive, and I used to walk through the culvert at Bramblewood and Chatham as a kid coming home from school. Anyhow, my question really is about the next steps. Okay, so this is a great presentation. You've done some great work for us. What do we need to do to keep the pressure on to make this happen? We obviously need money, so can you give us some direction on who and what and when?
I would have to defer to the county on that.
Yeah, that's no problem. Thank you for that question. We kind of thought it was coming. No, but but right, this is the first analysis. I mean, even the county executive hasn't seen this yet. The local council member hasn't seen this yet. We really wanted to get this out to the public as quickly as we could. You know, upon that review, we'll certainly be communicating with the public through that. The budgeting process, which will kick off the county executive. I don't think the date's been set yet, but there's a budget public hearing in January, and another one. Actually, I think there's one in December too. Now I think about it. It is December, right? Yeah. And then another one closer in the spring. But those are the opportunities where you can really, if there's options that you see and you like to encourage the county government to take further steps on that, that's the opportunity to do that. But again, we're still taking this analysis back and digesting it to try and see what can be done sooner and what can be done overall.
So when is this next meeting, you say?
I don't have the date off the top of my head, but we can certainly share it with the group. I think we have the emails, right, Christine? So at that time, we can share it.
Is it a regular county council meeting?
No, this would be, so the county executive has his budget public hearing.
Budget public hearing.
Yeah, but also voicing similar opinions to your local council member would go as well.
One quick question.
Yes, sir.
Do you know how much money a year we collect in rain tax?
I do.
And is that substantial enough to
Well, see,
put into this?
So the watershed protection and restoration fee that you're talking about, sir, is really designated for water quality improvements. We have a municipal separate storm sewer system permit that we've received from the state that goes to reducing the amount of untreated impervious acreage. This is more of a water quantity question versus a water quality question. If there is opportunity for water quality, we can certainly look for its applicability here. But the amount that we collect overall throughout the entire county is less than 10 million, I think, right now. Yeah, to give you an order of magnitude.
I want to answer her question before someone else asks another. One other thing that you can do that we would like to get is there was an email up there and a website up there, and there's comment cards out back. Let us know what you think, and if there's anything we didn't think about, suggest that. These aren't necessarily the only possible solutions. They're the ones that made the most sense to us, that moved the needle the most. But if there's, if we get 100 people who say we absolutely do not want option A, we'll consider that. So we need your feedback as well.
So we're getting letters from FEMA saying they are going to start charging us 5 to 18% per year more. They're upping our
Flood insurance.
yes.
Yeah.
So like we're talking about moving, which we're not going to get any value for our house because we're in the floodplain. And like if you're going to do this stuff, when will we get ideas of when you're going to start doing it and stuff like that? Because if something's not happening in the next year or so, I'm not even going to be able to afford my house because of the mortgage and adding on flood insurance. That I'm at $5,000 now, and 5 to 18% more per year is.
Well, I don't know what we're going to do is going to impact your flood insurance premium. I believe that's
yeah, but that'll take
decision.
us out of the floodplain.
I guess we have to look at the flood certificate, right, for that specific area. Again, this was a modeling analysis that was done, so we would probably have to perform a flood insurance certificate, and based off of which improvements would allow. Probably, because again, I mean, we're talking, what was the total again? It was like 60 million of overall improvements throughout. The county has a GO bond debt limit about 95 million throughout the entire county. So it's a significant portion. We also had an H&H study conducted for Ellicott City, the Tiber Hudson watershed, that also suggested 85 million in separate projects. So there is a lot of needs, and it'll be going through during the budgeting process is when we start to identify and try and look at what improvements we can be making and when.
Okay. Because I mean, my father-in-law helped build the house we live in, back in '67. Never flood issues, never anything. And now we just get hit with more flood insurance and more flood insurance and more flood insurance, and nothing is being done.
I understand your concerns, ma'am. But as far as the National Flood Insurance Program, we don't have that much authority over that. We do work on
And
it.
I get that.
Yeah.
It's just you're not doing anything in the community. I mean, we were hit with $67,000 in flood damage in 2011, and none of this was done back then because nothing happened in Ellicott City.
Nothing
Yeah.
happened in this watershed.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a
But
different.
now that everything happened in Ellicott City, now this has become the big one, and you know,
No, I
we
understand.
take steps every year, every time we flood, to help us, and we get more and more, you know, it's just.
What also you vote for, folks? You know, comes down to who the county council is and who the county executive is, whether or not it's an important issue. It was not an important issue previously.
Mike has a
I have a technical question. I have a lot, but I'll email you later because these people don't want to hear those. I guess upstream of Michael's Way, in your model, that was a proposed wet pond. I'm guessing if you're digging down that far.
Yeah, so we maintained the invert of the culvert basically and graded back. That's
Oh,
how that
okay.
was helped. So the existing channel would stay around the culvert. That depth of grading is more substantial as you go upstream.
Okay. All right. Sorry, but to back up to the hydrology portion, is there a gauge on the Tiber? Or there is? Okay.
Yes.
And then, last question for now. So I-70 and Route 99 make up a pretty good portion of the impervious, I imagine. And I'm just thinking about my favorite topic, the Harbin parcel, and how there's opportunities for stormwater mitigation on the Harbin parcel to help treat 90 or 99 and 70.
Is that one of the ones like right along?
It's going to be just off of those images.
Is it within our watershed?
Yes. It's in the upper, the very upper limits of Plum Tree.
It's north of Pond 1.
Yeah, it's the green space up top.
Could you repeat your question about?
So I'm just wondering what the contribution is from state highway impervious surfaces that potentially could be treated in the Harbin parcel. Because you've got a lot of runoff there, and the closer you hold it to that impervious space, the better off the downstream residents are.
Yeah, I'm not aware of exactly where the right-of-way limits are on the property or what the intent for state highway is.
There's probably several acres of state highway impervious surface right up there within upper limits of the drainage areas. Just curious.
We didn't look at it specifically, but it's something we can listen to.
Yeah, if you could submit that in writing, we could look at that to answer more closely.
And will the report have all the gory details?
Yes, it will be much more detailed.
Are there any other questions? No, looks like there's two now. Melissa, you want to go ahead?
So what, we talked a little bit about the church, we talked about Harbin parcel. What were your restrictions in developing the mitigation options? Did you consider various things on private property, or was anything on private property off limits? I mean, how creative did you get, and how broadly did you kind of think about, even, I don't know, I know for the Tiber-Hudson watershed, they're thinking about putting storage under Route 29, like, is that a possible idea under Route 70? I mean, how broad did your ideas for this mitigation go, and what were they restricted by?
Yeah, we basically looked at the available open space because most of the private properties do have small parcels or there's something built on them that is the developed area. So we were looking at something that would move the needle the most, having that large area to build a pond, not lots of small incremental things.
But was the Hargan property considered as open space?
It's actually on private property, so we did not consider storage there.
Thank you.
But since, another point to note is that it is at the top of the watershed, so what the drainage that it is contributing in that location, if you would put a large pond there, you wouldn't have enough runoff directed to that spot to actually be a large benefit.
So I understand from answers to previous questions that we need to provide feedback about what we like and what we don't like about this, and we need to show up in December and lobby for money for these projects. But let's say that we're able to figure out what we like, what we don't like, and get some money. What's a realistic time frame for having these things done? How long does it take to dredge out some land to make a pond? How long does it take to make a bridge over Route 40?
In general, taking easements, property acquisition, which takes time out of the picture, what we generally figure for a project is a 2-year period. 1 year to design it and get the permits in hand, and the second year to build it. Not that it takes a full year to build, but somewhere within that second year we'd be constructing it. So we typically ask for design money in 1 year, construction money the next year. So that's as a general rule. With some of these that, if we're, the 3 or 4, however many large ponds that are kind of in everyone's backyard in that big open space, that's a little bit more substantial of a project. That may take a little bit longer. What we're considering is, we're taking into consideration flood mitigation options and kind of assuming that we'll get some of the permits that we normally wouldn't get for a regular project. Typically you can't put an in-stream pond. It's just it's not allowed by the state. So we're working with the state down in Ellicott City to plead the case that it's flood mitigation, it's a consideration that we need to put in there, and they're somewhat open, but I imagine that the review period for the permit's going to be longer than a normal permit. So similarly, we're suggesting a lot of online facilities. It's going to require a little bit more time to permit, so it may extend it a little bit. Is that?
Yeah, so instead of 2 years, maybe 3, but it's not
Right.
1 and it's not 8.
Right.
Okay.
And I can't answer the how long does it take to build a bridge on Route 40 question.
Okay.
Well, in regards to that bridge on 40, state highway, totally different budget scenario. Have they been brought on board to
That's why I was looking over there.
Have they been brought on board to do something about the drainage where the proposed bridge or box culverts under 40 would be?
At this time, no. Because we recognized that the flooding was happening at the choke point at 40, that's why the county reached out to us.
Right.
We funded the study, as a kind of goodwill faith.
Right.
But from the state's perspective, and anything can be changed if you talk to the right politician. Let me start by saying that.
Yeah.
But from the state's perspective, that box was put in 1939, right? It was fine then. Development started happening in the 60s. No one was putting in flood controls. Next thing you know, 70s, 80s, 90s, finally people are putting in ponds for the 10-year storm. Next thing you know, the box doesn't function anymore. But from a state highway perspective, the box was built properly in the 30s and is still structurally sound. So we have no reason to replace it.
We were also looking at impacts of the replacement of the bridge, so that we have to analyze a scenario where the downstream impacts could affect downstream properties, because when you open up the bridge, there will be a conveyance improvement, but that will affect downstream properties. So that was part of the study that we were looking, how would it impact people on the other side between 40 and 144. I'm sorry. I just want to add to the replacement of US 40 bridge because sort of expected it's going to come up. We talked to our bridge department, and as Daniel mentioned, they have no, the inspections of the bridge indicates it's structurally sound, and the concern about improving the capacity of that bridge is the downstream conditions and downstream channel between US 40 and Frederick Road, and maybe even further down in Dunlong neighborhood. So part of the study was to look at what would be the impacts if we actually open up that culvert. So I think our initial idea was to do stormwater management upstream of the culvert and look at maybe a bypass system rather than go directly to replace this bridge, because that is several $1 million project that may not be as effective and beneficial as some other improvements.
Yeah, I mean, that's many flooding issues. The common idea is, right, you got, so you have, oh, sure. So you have water that's ponding upstream, right? It's because it's, like you said, it's being limited by a road or something blocking it, right? So what happens when you open up that hole that the water's going through? Well, more water goes through it. Well, when more water goes through it, there's people on the other side of that hole, right? And suddenly they're getting flooded. So one of the things you really have to consider is you're storing the water upstream or you're storing it downstream, but the water will be impacting people. So if we just open that up to a bridge, you know, suddenly we make new people unhappy. Yes, your problem is solved, but what about the downstream? So that's why it's not always just an easy go-to option.
Well, except the fact if it's blocking up and then going over the road and down the stream, then they're still going to get the water either way.
They get a little bit, but you got to think, while it's building up to go over, there's actually a lot of water being stored there, right?
Right.
In your basement.
Correct, yeah, there you go.
But the folks who did this study did point out that they didn't add any houses to the 100-year floodplain by putting in all these mitigations. There wasn't anybody who wasn't flooded before and is newly flooded. This only helped.
No, that was with the combined results, including the storage upstream.
Right,
So,
well, we haven't seen the one-at-a-time results.
correct, and we have run that. And that's what Dana was saying. When we ran that, the one-at-a-time result for opening up the bridges, people downstream experienced increased flooding. It is another one of the issues. You know, and not to say that it can't be done, you know, obviously there's ways it can be done. Maybe their flooding is not as bad as the upstream, so on and such forth, but we would want to look at it more. I just don't think that we should rush to the easy answer of open up the bridge, because there is a possible ramification of the people downstream being impacted.
Yeah, I had a question on the sorry, go.
We'll get you next.
Yeah, on the we're going to put the ponds on zone 1 there, that green space. Does the county own that, or is that still owned by the original developer?
It's both. There's an open space parcel that the county owns, and then another portion is still privately owned.
Okay, so you'd have to acquire that land from whoever it is.
Right.
Next question.
I just had a question. He was asking about the ponds and how long that would take. So I just wondered about, like, for example, my road Hearthstone, where they're talking about taking up the culvert and making that a bridge. Would that be the same time frame as a pond, or would it be quicker, slower, or you don't know?
I'll say generally a similar time frame.
Okay.
My group does streams and ponds. Someone else in the county would do the bridge. But I would assume it wouldn't be significantly quicker, and I would assume that maybe it's a little bit longer because just for a variety of reasons, but yeah, I'd rather not.
No, I was just curious.
Just another question on timeframes. Can we get a little, I just say it this way, but can we get a little reality check? Like down in Ellicott City, they've done work to repair damage, but actually they haven't, as far as I understand, haven't broken ground on any of the mitigation projects yet. So when you talk about 1 year to design and 1 year to build, is that really realistic? It seems like it might take a bit longer.
It's realistic if the budget is there. I mean, if I've got a project ready to start It typically takes a year to get it designed and built, designed and permitted, and a year to construct. If the construction is, for argument's sake, this $27 million project, I won't get $27 million in my entire budget, let alone one project. So that may be several more years to build up that money. It depends on which project, how much it costs, but for my normal projects, I get enough budget to design 1 year, build the next.
I think there's also the added complexity of working, you know, a lot of these ponds are high hazard dams, so working with the Maryland Dam Safety Group, and that's, you know, to your point about why it's taking a little bit longer in the other cities, because those are extremely large retention facilities that have to go through Maryland Dam Safety. They have to work with DNR. I mean, there's a lot of complexities with those projects that contributes to that.
This is back to the 4-foot pipe that goes under Route 40. Who actually maintains that? Is that the county or does the state maintain that pipe?
I believe that's private property that goes
Under
under the bare
40?
bones. Oh, under Route 40, I'm
Under
sorry.
40.
The
What goes under the shopping center, then goes under.
Right. The problem is that it doesn't show up on any map, but there is a pipe that goes somewhere.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And it comes out on the other side. So the question is that it seems as though no one knows what it is, the condition of it.
No,
So,
No, we,
you do?
State highway maintains within, I'm sorry. State highway is responsible for maintenance pipes within our right of way. So there will be a portion of the culvert that our maintenance crew would maintain. But what I understand, you're talking about the little Plum Tree, right? The one
Yeah,
that
that's
goes-
little
yes,
Plum
yeah.
Tree.
So it connects to a private system, which I understand is the problem. That is a small pipe.
The most constricted flow is that 4-foot pipe under the private property, under the bare bones. It's actually a 5-foot pipe that's currently there.
Is there space on the other side of that pipe for water storage or ponding? Has that been looked at further downstream? So now, you know, it's a problem of, you store it upstream or you store it downstream, you gotta store it somewhere, right? And would that help if that pipe were bigger, we conveyed the water through underneath the shopping center and put it somewhere further downstream?
So that pipe actually eventually, I'm not sure what happens between the shopping center, but I've walked small portions of it. It's a 5-foot RCP or concrete culvert at the beginning, and it meanders somehow through the shopping center, which is the only, to me, I think there's some plans hidden somewhere maybe, but once you get close to 40, it actually opens up to a 6x10 box culvert
Okay.
under 40.
But what's on the other side then?
An 84-inch metal pipe.
I mean, when going further down, is there
And then
any
open
open
channel.
space to store the water after it must open up somewhere, or is it still buried the whole way
No,
down?
it opens up, I think is it right, there's Starbucks?
Behind the Capital One Bank.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just looking at it at a cost perspective, if we're looking at the parkway costing $26 million, something of that nature to convey the flow through that long area of impervious would be very costly as well.
If you store the water downstream, it doesn't really help you upstream.
If you convey it faster to that downstream storage spot, that doesn't help.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it's a bigger pipe leading to a pond. Downstream people don't get flooded.
Yeah.
Try a bigger pipe.
No, I mean, obviously, we don't have space along that small branch, right, that you showed. There's no space to put ponding or store the water there.
Right.
So the only option is really to convey it someplace where you can't store it. So
Yeah.
that's what I was looking at. Did you consider those kind of options?
That was the purple diversion option, where it showed picking up the discharge at
Oh, yeah, going under
the
Chatham.
driveway and conveying it down Chatham. That's what that represented on Little Plum Tree.
And so, sorry, let me just say this real quick. One of the things to keep in mind about development, and this is just kind of a sin of all of our pasts, right? It's just what happened. When these streams were originally built, you had kind of wide open areas, and you know, it was just very open space. And then what happened was when developers came in, they thought, okay, let's just stay out of the stream. So, but they wanted to maximize their space and their value, right? So what they did was they built right up to the stream, right? And suddenly, when you used to get these events, and they'd spread out over this nice long valley, right? You'd have all this open space, and the water would be flowing gentle. Now you've cut that off, and you've built up. So what you're doing is you're channelizing all this water that had so much room to spread out. You're taking a huge, wonderful open area, and you're putting it almost in a pipe, and you're forcing it through the pipe, right? That's one of the issues with what has happened over the years. So in areas like Little Plum Tree Branch and Ramblewood Road, when you've got that parking lot coming right up to the edge, then you've got that little culvert that you remove and you make to a bridge. Well, you still have the elevation next to that raised and a parking lot put over it. So without suddenly tearing down certain levels of development, right, it's not always very easy to get that open space for the water to kind of gently spread out like it used to do. So it is a problem, and it's just a problem that we have all over, PG County, Montgomery County. We see it all the time. And believe me, we are trying to find better ways to work with it. But I just want to let you guys know this, that we do look for the options. And you're right in many ways. We need to get more innovative. We need to get smarter about it, because these problems aren't going away. And we can't just go and tear people's homes down, right? So it is an active process. And that's why Mark said, we want your feedback, we want your ideas. But we also have to understand that there's limitations within the cost. Someone said about an underground vault. We can do that. We have an underground vault in an SHA project, and it costs $5 million or something like that. And that's for like a 10-year storm event to control that, right? Now we're talking about a 100-year storm event. So the cost just gets astronomically larger and larger. So certain ideas of these we didn't think of off the top of our head, because from maybe a far eye check we said, okay, that might be $50 million. Maybe that's a little out of our range. But if there's something we didn't see, or if there's something that maybe that would work and there's a way we can cut that cost down, we want to hear about it. But believe me, there was a lot of options explored, and even with these options, we went pretty far out there. We got to start getting innovative. So
there's been some talk about culverts on private property and things like that. What are the actual legal responsibilities or requirements of a private property owner that has any sort of stormwater management culvert or anything on their property? I mean, I would think that there must be some sort of legal requirements if for instance, if someone wants to block a culvert on their property and that floods the whole entire neighborhood, they must be held accountable for that. So I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a stormwater expert, but what are the legal responsibilities of private property owners that have these culverts running through their property vis-a-vis their neighbors and the greater public safety, really? It's a public safety issue. There's several people who had to get rescued in our neighborhood when the July 30th flood happened. So it's a public safety issue. So yeah, what is the responsibility of these private property owners that have this stuff on their property and maybe could do something about it?
I'll preface my response with I'm not a lawyer either. My understanding is that the responsibility of the private property owner is to maintain what was there initially with the original development, that you cannot actively change something that would impact someone else, but I don't believe there's a requirement that if something happens upstream, the downstream owner is responsible for upgrading their private property to accommodate something that's happened elsewhere in the watershed. So, it's basically maintaining what's there. In theory, what's there was put in per county regulations at the time it was developed. But you can't just block the culvert because you don't want the water going under your property or through your property. So, does that answer your question? Kind of, sort of?
Thank you.
I'm not sure what you get.
What about maintenance?
responsibilities.
If they're not maintaining it, is there?
I mean, I would imagine they need to maintain it. If they're not maintaining it, that's affecting someone upstream, or affecting somebody.
What do you mean by the end of it's
Any other questions? Going once? Going twice?
Now, she said something about they were sending people out to clean the woods back behind and all that, and we were never contacted. We had nobody come back behind where we were and clean anything.
Yeah, they did. They did. It was practically useless. There was
Okay.
drains there, they set it on the side, where the next rain's going to wash it back in.
Because I never noticed or saw anything done, so.
It's not
Okay.
worthwhile.
Any other questions? All right. Well, I want to thank everyone again for coming out this evening. Again, please provide your comments to the email address that was up there before, or the sheets that you have in front of you. We will be sticking around for a little bit here if you have any additional questions, but again, I want to thank you all for coming out this evening. Appreciate it.